Hi, I'm JIJI MOL, Assistant Professor, Department of Language from AJK Arts and Science College, Coimbatore. Today, we are going to deal with Bardea University 4th Semester Allied English Unit 1. So, let's start with the poem Bird Sanctuary. Bird Sanctuary appears in the collection The Golden Treasury of Indo-Anglican Poetry 1828 to 1965. It was published in the year 1970. Between 1917 and 1918, Sarojini Naidu traveled a number of places in India. Later, in 1970, she went to London to advocate for universal suffrage. The poem was written around this period. Naidu's wholehearted involvement in Indian independence movement might have made her soul weary. Besides, the subjugation of her motherland was also long-lasting headache that should not find a cure. The Bird Sanctuary appears in the collection Golden Treasury of Indo-Anglican Poetry, 1828 to 1965. It was published in the year 1970. Between 1915 and 1918, Sarojini Naidu traveled to a number of places in India. Later in 1970, she went to London to advocate for universal suffrage. The poem was written around this period. Naidu's wholehearted involvement in the Indian independence movement might have made her soul weary. Besides, the subjugation of her motherland was also a long-lasting headache that could not find a cure of. Only nature gave her solace during this period. Through this poem, Naidu tried to express her longing for spiritual resort to soothe her. The Bird Sanctuary appears in the collection Golden Treasury of Indo-Anglican Poetry, 1828 to 1965. It was published in the year 1917. Between 1915 and 1918, Sarojini Naidu traveled to a number of places in India. Later, in 1970, she went to London to advocate for universal suffrage. The poem was written around this period. Naidu's wholehearted involvement in the Indian independence movement might have made her soul weary. Besides, the subjugation of her motherland was also a long-lasting headache that she could not find a cure of. Only nature gave her solace during this phase. Through this poem, Naidu tries to express her longing for her spiritual resort to soothe her weary mind. Let's start the poem. In your quiet garden wakes a magic tumult of winged choristers that keeps the festival of dawn. Gleefully rise the cry of... Let's start the poem. Bird Sanctuary by Sarojini Naidu. In your quiet garden wakes a magic tumult of winged choristers that keep the festival of dawn. Bleakly rise the carols in richly condensed rapture from lyric thoughts of amber, of ebony and fawn. The bulbul and the oriole, the honeybird and shama flit among high boughs that tip with the nectar and with dew. Upon the grass, the wandering gull parades its sea-washed silver, the hobie, the kingfisher, their bronze and sapphire blue, while grey pigeons dreaming of a home amid the treetops, fill their beaks with a silken down and slender banyan wings. But the jade-green gypsy parrots are only gay muradros and pose upon their sunward flight to plunder red ripe figs. In your gracious garden, there is joy and fostering freedom, nesting place and singing face for every feathered thing. Oh, master of birds, grand sanctuary and shelter, also to homing birds that bears a broken wing. Let's start the summary. The poet is in conversation with Almighty God. According to her, a magical tumult. There is noise of winged choristers, that is the birds wakes up the quiet garden of God. This noise keeps the dawn time festive and joyful. Carols rise cheerfully in richly condensed rapture from lyrics, thoughts of the birds like amber, ebony, and far. In other words, as soon as the dawn approaches, all birds begins to sing songs cheerfully in a melodious and joyous tone. Let's move on to the next stanza. According to the poet, birds like bulbul, oriole, honeybird, and shama move swiftly among high branches from which the nectar and dew falls down. Wandering seagull parades over the grass with its sea-washed skin. The hope and the kingfisher also show their bronze and sapphire blue colors. Let's move on to the next stanza, the third stanza. While great pigeon with a dream of building their home on the top of the tree fill their beaks with soft, silk-like and thin banning wings. However, there are some birds like jade-green gypsy parrots which only fly here and there cheerfully and stop their long flights just to eat red and ripe figs. The concluding stanza. In the last stanza, the poet says to the god that his gracious garden there is a joy and freedom, home for comfort and singing for every feathered thing. And she prays to the master of to the grand sanctuary and shelter to even a bird with a broken wing. In other words, she prays to God not to leave even a single creature on earth homeless. In a nutshell, we can say the bird sanctuary takes the readers to the nature's abode, a quiet garden filled with sonorous music of birds. It is like a temple where dawn choristers of natures begin with the hymn of God, the Almighty in unison. For Naidu's poetic persona, not only the birds, but all the creatures sings together. In this beautiful garden, she can notice a number of birds including bulbul, oriole, honeybird, shama, etc. She describes what they do in the garden. Furthermore, Naidu contrasts the lifestyle of great pigeons and gypsy parrots. Finally, she evokes the spirit of the master of birds to give her sad soul a place in his magnanimous sanctuary. Let's move on to the next poem, Meeting at Night by Robert Browning. Meeting at Night is a poem by Victorian poet Robert Browning, which follows the journey of its speakers to a meeting with a lover. It was published in Dramatic Romances and Lyrics in the year 1845. Browning composed the poem during his courtship of Elizabeth Barrett, his future wife, who was already a successful poet at the time. Barrett's father did not approve of Browning, and perhaps a hint of this can be detected in a hushed and secretive nature of the meeting. The poem is unusual for the Victorian era because it is so sensual and sexually suggestive in the time of moral and social constructivism. No, constructivism, it is a conservatism. Let's start the poem. The poem begins like this. Meeting at Night by Robert Browning. The grey sea and the long back land, and yellow half moon large and low, and the startled little waves that leap in fairy ringlets from their sleep. As I gain the cove with a pushing prow, and quench its speedy eye the sashi sand, then a mile of warm sea-scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. A tap with pain, the quick sharps catch, and blue spot of light and match, and a voice less loud through its joys and fears, then 2 hearts beating each to each. Meeting at Night. Summary. The speaker describes a mysterious landscape, a dull sea, and the expanse of a land that looks black in the darkness. Half moon looms low in the sky, giving off a yellow light. Small waves appears in little rings where previously the surface had been calm. The speaker roars into the bay and brings the vessel to a halt in the wet sand. The speaker walks for a mile along the warm beach and can smell the sea. The speaker continues to cross the fields until reaching a farm. The speaker knocks gently on a window, at which point someone else hurriedly strikes a match that bursts into blue flame. A voice, either the speaker's or this lover's talks, overcome with happiness and fear. The voice, though, doesn't seem to be as loud as the lovers' racing hearts which beats together. Robert Browning poem Meeting at Night is essentially a narrative of a man who is journeying to meet her lover. Robert Browning's poem Meeting at Night is essentially a narrative of a man who is journeying to meet his lover. The man recounts his journey as undertakes it, mentioning or observing different portions of the trip, each in turn. One by one, he briefly describes his surroundings as he passes by them, merely noting them as if they bear only fleeting significance to him. However, although his descriptions are unpretentious and abruptly forgotten as he continues onwards towards his goal, each line of the poem contains striking imagery. Let's move on to the next poem, A Different History by Sujata Bhatt. A Different History by Sujata Bhatt is not a raging piece of protest, rather, it teaches how to revisit one's own cultural past in a curious and sensible way. A Different History is one of the best known poems by Sujata Bhatt published in her debut collection, Bruism, published in the year 1988. This poem taps into the core features of Indian culture and faith, the colonial past, and the very concept of colonial hangover, but writes about how to approach and appreciate Indian history from a revisionist post-colonial point of view, with a particular emphasis on the positive aspects of her own culture and spiritual traditions. She asked three intriguing questions revolving around language in the concluding stanza. Let's start the poem, A Different History. Great Pan is not dead. He simply emigrated to India. Here the gods roam freely disguised as snakes and monkeys. Every tea is sacred, and it is a sin to be rude to a book. It is a sin to show a book aside with your food. A sin to slum books down hard on the table. A sin to toss the one carelessly across a room. You must learn how to turn the pages gently without disturbing Saraswati, without offending the tree from whose the wood the paper was made. Which language has not been the oppressor's tongue? Which language truly mean to murder someone? And how does it happen that after the torture, after the soul has been cropped, with a long sindhi swooping out of the conqueror's face, the unborn grandchildren grow to love that strange language? The poem begins with a reference to ancient Greek god Pan. In Indian Vedic mythology, Pushan is a counterpart of Pan. According to the speaker, Pan settled permanently in India, where gods roam freely disguised as different creatures. Nature is worshipped as a deity and knowledge is regarded as divine. This is why Indians have to pay due respect to their books as well as the trees from which the books are made. In the next stanza, she poses some questions regarding English, the language of the colonizers, and wonders how this strange language became so dear to present generation. The poetess Sujata Bhatt, while writing this poem, has given importance to the culture and various religions in India. She was emphasized in her poem by repeating words and questions and thereby making her poem stronger. She writes about Indian traditions, lost identities, importance of language, cultural differences to create different moods and themes. In the first part of the poem, she concentrates on the respect of education and learning. She claims that in Indian religion, every object is sacred. There is God in trees. You should treat your books as the goddesses of knowledge. You should gentle when turning the pages of the book that you read for knowledge of religion. She has written this poem describing the British colonization days when British oppressed the Indians. They forced them to learn the English language through India in various languages were spoken. She is annoyed at this attitude of the British. She also explains how British tried to change the identities of the people of India with us in him. She claims that the future generation will love the strange language like they love their mother tongue. According to her, language had been used as a weapon to target its victim in a figurative sense. The poem appeals to the readers because it is full of culture of a different country. In the initial stage, it is descriptive and then changes to interrogative. The cultural background of Suchata is reflected in the first part of the poem. She has referred to God and books to talk about Indian culture. As you read the poem, further you realize that she is talking about learning a new language. She admits that in spite of having to learn 4 languages, she had to adapt herself to English language. She compares herself with anyone who would feel sacred to learn new language because of ending up in making mistakes. She is one of the opinion that when you learn a new language, it starts dominating you, especially when it is a lingua franca of a particular country. It is just like British forced upon India to adapt to English language. She also suggests in her languages skills, she is against this forced learning, but she claims that after a few years, they all speak the language which they are forced to, sacrificing their culture. In this way, the children grow up forgetting their mother tongue and learn a foreign language and even adapt to their culture. We feel that a different history is a poem that tells about a different language. It is also tells how a change of culture affects the people of a country. This is when a foreign rule forces you to adapt to their lifestyle, learn their language, and inculcate their culture in you. She makes references to Indian gods and goddesses. This makes the poem appealing as readers want to gain knowledge and learn about Indian culture. But as you read further, it is about learning new language. She claims that she found it very hard and had to go through great difficulties in learning in Indian traditional language and the English language. She calls this language as a strange language because at the time she was very young. She refers to this foreign language as an oppressor's language. It affects not only mother tongue of the people but also changes their culture, the way of living, and may many adapt to new religion. Sujata Bhatt was born in Pune in the year 1956. At the age of 12, she migrated with her parents to the US. She completed her education and received a master's in fine arts from the University of Iowa. After in Canada, she went on to be a resident writer at University of Victoria in Canada. In recent years, she was a Penisvi in Sujata Bhatt was born in Pune in the year 1956. At the age of 12, she migrated with her parents to the US. She completed her education and received a master's in fine arts from the University of Iowa. Later in Canada, she went to be a resident writer at University of Victoria in Canada. In recent years, she was in Pennsylvania at Dickinson College as a visiting fellow. She is a well-known poetess at present and resides in Bremen, Germany with her daughter and husband. She has won accolades and awards of her poems not only in Asia but also the other parts of the world. In 1991, she receives a Colmandali. Sujata considers language as a physical act of speaking. Was synonymous with the tongue. She considers her mother tongue, Gujarati, and her childhood in India as the deepest layer of her identity. Then, ironically, she claims that she has chosen English as the language she speaks in. She uses the same in her daily life and by law chooses to write her poems in English. In the most of her works, she depicts repressions of this divided heritage. She explained the complex status of English. She has the art to convey ironically the the beauties of English and colonial implications in her poem in different history. She informs that her grandfather, being in prison during the British days, who in order to comfort himself during his time in prison read Tennyson. She has written a wonderful poems, but all of them had some or other relation with the Indian and Western cultures. Sujata acknowledges that languages split you from experience, but through the strength of her writing, she brings you closer to it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.